If you're looking to buy a stacked NBA 2K account with max badges and more, visit sportstmb.com. He has been in the community for years and has hundreds of reviews. Click the first link in the description to get your account today.
Before this video starts, if you enjoy this video, there are many more like it already on the channel, with many more like it to come in the future, so subscribe. I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so I would really appreciate it. I upload almost daily on this channel, so if you're looking for some consistent basketball talk, this is the place for it. Also, drop a like on the video. It only takes 1 second and it makes a massive difference. Today we are talking about Greg Oden, which means this video is going to get 15 views. But I feel like the potential that Greg Oden had isn't really talked about enough, so I'm going to talk about it today. Greg Oden is commonly considered to be one of the biggest busts in NBA history because he was picked ahead of Kevin Durant. Though no one's really mad at Oden for this because, as most people should know, his knees were basically made of glass, and on top of that, he had a leg that was 1 inch shorter than the other, so it was injury city for him. This is common knowledge. However, I don't think people are aware of just how good Greg Oden was supposed to be, because while now people like to criticize the Blazers for passing on Kevin Durant, Greg was the obvious choice at the time. He was about as close to the consensus #1 pick as you can be, without actually being the consensus #1 pick. In fact, I might even go as far as to say that if Oden was able to reach his peak, he wouldn't have been that far off from the level of Kevin Durant. Let's talk about it. Greg Oden was a 7-footer who weighed nearly 300 pounds going into the draft, and this was not 300 pounds of fat. Oden was in good shape. He was also pretty damn athletic with a 7'4" wingspan and a 34-inch vertical, which is 6 inches higher than the NBA average as a guy who is nearly 300 pounds. Greg was actually pretty much nearly identical to Joel Embiid physically, same height, weight, wingspan, but he was actually more athletic than Embiid. So that's for the physical, but as for how that translated on the court, well, on the defensive end, he had a Shaq-level floor defensively. What I mean by this is when you are as big as a guy like Shaq in the 2000s, when you aren't asked to defend in space as a center, you are at the very least going to be an okay defensive player. I think Shaq gets too much credit for his defense, especially in LA. He had no business getting his all-defensive second-team selections that he got while he was there. But Shaq was so damn big that he could put in almost zero effort and still have a positive impact on defense. Because when you put that much person in front of the basket, you are going to throw off some guys around the rim. And 7 feet and 285 pounds is a lot of people. So his floor at that size at his time was already impactful, but because of Oden's athleticism and great instincts, he was a fantastic defensive player. In college, he was known as a rim protector. He averaged 3.3 blocks a game in just 29 minutes of action. And he made the Big Ten All-Defensive Team as well as Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. Also in college, his athleticism and size showed itself on the boards. Now, he averaged just short of 10 rebounds a game, however 3.6 of those were offensive, which is elite. And if we look at those two numbers in the NBA, Greg was only allowed to play 22 minutes a game in just 82 games with Portland because of his injuries. But in that time, he averaged 7.3 rebounds a game with 2.8 being offensive. And if we take those numbers over to per 36, he averaged 12 boards a game with 4.5 being offensive rebounds, which is just 0.6 less offensive rebounds a game than the all-time leader in rebounds per game in Moses Malone for their careers. And per 36, he averaged 2.3 blocks a game, and in the 21 games that he played in his second season, he averaged 3.4 blocks a game. So already, Oden looks like an all-time great rebounder and shot blocker if he doesn't have injuries. By the way, I removed the 23 games that he played with Miami in 2014 out of this equation because he was completely like a different player by then. But now let's talk about the offense. Now, admittingly, with the comparison in the thumbnail, I don't think he would be quite Shaq-like offensively, at least in terms of volume. However, his actual physical dominance would be near the same level, with him actually having a little bit better touch than I think Shaq had. Now in college, he averaged 16 points a game, which obviously isn't a lot, but he shot 62%. The guy just wasn't someone who forced a lot of shots. He certainly isn't on the same level of dominance that Shaq had in his last 2 seasons in college, where he averaged 26 points a game on the same efficiency. But in the NBA, with a team that had a lot of offensive options, which we'll get to in a second, he averaged 9 points a game on 58% from the field, which is not a lot, but per 36, he averaged 15 points a game and averaged 17 in 2010 with a 60% shooting percentage. With his athleticism, Greg Oden was a really good roll man and a reliable lob target. But where he got his offense one-on-one outside of the flow of the offense was in the post, because with his size and touch, Oden was a reliable post scorer. He was prone to whip out a drop step and force his defender into the basket with his strength, but also he had the touch to hit a hook shot consistently. So Greg was a very athletic and massive big man who could dominate in the low post, be one of the better rebounders in the NBA, and be a phenomenal rim protector. Unfortunately though, this was obviously ruined by injury, though I do think it's interesting to speculate on what his peak could have been had he not had to deal with injuries, where he would rank amongst the league, and what kind of numbers he would average. Well, I definitely think that he would be a top 10 player in the league at his peak, and he'd probably be the best center in the NBA, because by then Dwight Howard would have fizzled out a little bit, but prime Dwight Howard is probably pretty comparable to Greg Oden. That's actually not a bad comparison, except Dwight's a lot faster. In terms of his numbers, his point production is hard to call because he never got real starters minutes, and because he played on a team with 2 go-to options in Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge, and a few other notable options like Gerald Wallace. So in terms of shots per game, Greg Oden probably wasn't going to get shots like that because of the other guys on his team. Now, with him being the clear number 1 option, I think he could have been a 25 on 55% shooting type of guy, but that probably was not going to happen with Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge, so realistically I think he's a 20 on 60% shooting type of guy. And then rebounding wise, I think he'd average around 12 to 13, maybe even 14. Doesn't help that he's playing alongside LaMarcus Aldridge. And he'd probably have a peak of around 3 blocks a game, probably average a little bit less than that in total. So let's say he does that over a 13-year career, playing 70 games per season. With 2012 and let's say 2.8 blocks as his averages, if he did that, he would have been just over 18,000 points, nearly 11,000 rebounds, and over 2,500 blocks, which would place him 75th all-time in scoring, 31st in rebounding, and 9th all-time in blocks. So this is a pretty damn great big man all-time, even with his statistics being capped by the people on his team. But let's actually take a look at that team that Oden was on, because I think that team would have led to a lot of accolades for Oden as well, because I feel like people forget about the potential of the late 2000s Blazers on top of Oden. Everyone knows about Brandon Roy. He is arguably a bigger what-if than Greg Oden, even though I think Oden had a higher potential. From 2007 to 2010, he averaged 21, 5, and 5 on 47% shooting and made 3 All-Star teams. He was not a superstar by any means, but he was very good and a very clutch player. Then of course on this team there was the young LaMarcus Aldridge. With him we don't have to speculate on how good he would have been because his career was not plagued by injuries. He's made 7 All-Star teams over 16 seasons. He averages 20 and 8 for his career. He's almost certainly a Hall of Famer, a deadly mid-range and post scorer with a solid all-around game. These 3 made up the core for the Portland Trail Blazers in the late 2000s, making a big 3. However, of course, injury would fuck this whole thing up. But just to highlight just how good this big 3 could have been, with all of these players not anywhere near their peaks in the 2008 through 2010 seasons when Oden was 21 and 22, Roy was 24 and 25, and Aldridge was 23 and 24. These 3, when they all played together, had a 50 and 12 record, which is an 81% win percentage, which translated to an 82 game season is good for 66 wins, which is 14th all time in wins. That is with none of them at their peaks yet, so just imagine how good they would have been at their peaks with injury not ruining the whole thing. And Greg Oden would have been at the helm of all of this because I think he had the highest potential of anyone on that team. and we might have seen big men not die out as fast as they did if Oden was able to dominate like he could have. But that is the forgotten potential of Greg Oden as well as the Portland Trail Blazers. However, before we go, I do want to promote something that relates to this. For those of you who might be new to this channel, you might not be aware that I started off my YouTube career being a what if guy. And the last one I did, and sadly the lowest viewed one, was a what if on Roy and Oden not dealing with injuries. It's also objectively my best and most realistic what if, so if that's something that interests you, go check that one out. Be forewarned, the editing in that is cringy. My audio is cringy. I didn't have any confidence yet, so that's just what happens when you grow on YouTube. Your content hopefully gets better. That's the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.